Today, I'm going to use this 2000 watt laser cleaner to remove this rust from this 1985 Toyota frame. And then I'm going to give it some fresh primer and paint. And I'm in Ohio, where old Toyotas like this come to die thanks to road salt. So this isn't just your average surface rust. And in certain areas where the rust is really heavy, I do have some reinforcements. First, let me introduce the FLC 2000 by Fortune laser. It's a 2000 watt continuous wave laser cleaning machine that I got in 2025 to help with all the rusty projects I get myself into on this channel. If you want to know all the advantages and disadvantages of a laser cleaning machine, I'll put a link in the description all about the FLC 2000. The frame is from a 1985 4Runner that started life in Colorado and ended up in northern Ohio. There were plenty of rust holes in the body that I got to repair, but the frame is actually very solid, just rusty. Now that you're up to speed, let's go play with a Class 4 laser. We're going to start up here at the front end of the frame where the rust isn't as bad. Here's the test that I did in a previous video. I've got a piece of sheet metal in the background so I don't strip the finish off my concrete, and we've got a lot of grease and oil on this as well. And to start off with, we'll try 100 hertz scanning frequency, 50 millimeters scan width, and 1500 watts for the power. This area of the frame had some grease and oil on it, so that's why there's the excess smoke and fire. So that's pretty clean. I got a little bit of grime left right here I didn't take off, and over here I've got a little bit of what looks like it could have been scaling that didn't come off. So I'm going to adjust my settings a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit more aggressive on the scanning frequency. We'll do 70 hertz, and we'll go a little bit wider on the width. We'll do 75 millimeters, and for peak power we'll just bump it up to 2000. Take the rest of that scaling off there. I still have some of this, that's hot. I still have some of this scaling here, and it does come off with a wire brush. So I'm gonna go adjust my settings a little bit more and see if we can remove that all at once. We'll try 40 hertz. And here's a close-up of this section. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I may need to go back a little bit with the Viva burnishing and polishing tool over there, just to knock off any of these little tiny little sort of bumps that are left behind. But overall, this machine is doing exactly what I got it for, which is to save me a lot of time. It's going to save me a lot of time. I'm ready to strip these axles down as well. My ADHD just kicked in. We should probably get a preview of that. Moving on back to the middle of the frame, you can see the rust and scaling is getting a lot worse. Okay, here's the first example where the laser just isn't going to cut through all the scaling rust. While it did clean the surface, these scales were still pretty securely attached And once I scrape those off, I've got more rust underneath. And by the way, did you hear that sound? I got some comments in a previous video about how this frame is junk. Well, I'll tell you what, you must be from California, because here in Ohio, this is a solid frame. That's more than we can ask for here in the state of Ohio. And that is by far the most problematic area on these frames. So if that's solid, I checked the rest of this and it's all good as well. The solid frame is actually the reason I bought this rusted out 4Runner with a knocking engine, because I can fix all that. A solid frame is something you're not gonna find in the state of Ohio. I am gonna go a little bit more aggressive on the settings though. The 30 hertz will etch the metal a little bit more, but that should help remove some of this scaling rust. The biggest disadvantage of a continuous wave laser versus a pulsed laser is heat. This laser will get metal hot to the point where it's glowing bright red. Even while cleaning rust from sheet metal, this machine will cause the metal to deform and warp. Meanwhile, I've used a pulsed laser on sheet metal and it didn't burn off the paint on the opposite side. But for a thick steel frame with heavy rust, a continuous wave laser is absolutely the better choice because of its power and speed. Once again, I can scrape off some of the areas of heavy scaling, exposing more rust underneath. So I'm using a 40 grit drum on the Beaver burnishing and polishing tool I reviewed a couple videos ago to try and remove anything from the surface. Then I used the laser cleaner again on the newly exposed rust. All right, let's give it some scrapes. And you can see that I uncovered yet some more rust beneath the surface. So on something here like this cross member, I think I can get by with just using the FLC 2000, but when you get over to these rails where there's really thick heavy rust, I'm definitely gonna have to go over with this 40 grit wheel on the burnishing and polishing tool first, knock off the heavy stuff, hit it with the laser cleaning machine, and then possibly repeat the process, because you can see I've still got some rust on the top edge here underneath this bumpy area, which is scaling what's left behind. So I used the 40 grit drum to do a quick pass over all the heavily rusted areas first to knock off the worst of the scaling rust. And to get into all these tight areas and these little tiny corners here that I can't reach with that, I will have to use the needle scaler. The needle scaler is a great tool for heavy rust removal. It's pretty much 16 tiny jackhammers that can reach into tight spaces. However, the process is slow, loud, and even with work gloves, the vibrations going through my hands did get tiresome after a while. For something like a frame with a lot of corners and tight areas, it was perfect. I'll put a link to a needle scaler in the description because I couldn't have completed this job without it. Here's one of the heavily scaled areas on the top of the frame rail. This rust scale survived the 40 grit drum. Even with the needle scaler, it took some work to break this one loose. Here's another area that the 40 grit drum couldn't get through. This is why you don't buy a classic Toyota truck from Ohio. And I wasn't even joking. This is one of the nicer Toyota frames I've had. If I used this needle scaler on some of the other Toyota frames I had on the channel, I think it would go right through a lot of areas. Here's another section of frame, farther toward the rear, more rust and more scaling. These old frames rust out at the rear first here in northern Ohio, I'm guessing because all the road salt spray and brine solution kicked up by the tires lands back here. I didn't even bother with starting out using the laser here. I'm knocking off the worst of the worst with the needle scaler. And there is still plenty of scaling left. I was overly optimistic when I imagined how easy stripping this frame would be. Maybe a frame with normal surface rust, like the front end of this frame had, might be good to go after a couple passes of the laser. Or the southern frame I put under the 1980 long bed would have been a perfect candidate for laser cleaning. But if your frame looks like this, you'll need a few more tools. This is the cross member where the spare tire mounts, and they're notorious for rotting away around here, to the point where Toyota spare tires have fallen off while driving down the road. The original Ohio frame on the 1980 long bed was so rotted in this area that I was able to remove the spare tire with just my foot. So there was a lot of scale to remove from this area. Okay, I've been at this for probably about 5 hours. I did the top edge and I did the outside and the inside of the rails, and spent a lot of time, especially here in the back where it was the most crusty, and I've got it cleaned up to a point where I think it's time to give it the FLC 2000 treatment and see how well it cleans up. And once I get this top all done, I still need to take this frame, flip the whole thing over, and clean up the underside. All right, scrape test. And you can see I'm not getting full penetration all the way down through the rust once again. So I'm gonna experiment with my settings and see if I can find something that's gonna work better. All right, I think I've got it. Here's my settings. And the problem was I just wasn't spending enough time. So here I spent a lot of time, then I went back over it with this 40 grit drum here, and it came out looking pretty clean. Let's try it again right here. You can hear the difference in the sound of the laser with the 30 Hz frequency setting. This is the most aggressive and would leave etch marks in a lot of surfaces. But for this heavy scaling rust, it is perfect. I did a quick pass over this with a needle scaler to knock off the worst of the scaling. All these tiny sparks flying off that look kind of like light welding spatter, that's rusty metal being lasered off the surface. Now we're left with a cleaner surface that looks rust-free, but notice there is some scaling there that isn't rust colored, but it is still penetrating the surface of the frame. So now I'm going over the area I just cleaned with the 40 grit drum. Notice how much it brightens up the surface. That's clean, bare steel. However, it also uncovered some more rusty areas where the scaling rust was deeper than the other areas. No matter how much time I spend with the 40 grit drum, I just can't get down into those smaller recessed areas where rust is still present. This is a lot better than it was when I started and might be good enough for some, but I'm looking to get this surface as close to perfectly clean as possible before priming and painting. So I'm doing another pass with the FLC 2000 on the same aggressive 30 Hz frequency setting, and you can see by the amount of sparks that there is still a good amount of rust and contamination hiding in the fine pores of this mostly clean steel. Here's before and here's after. And even at an extreme close-up, I can't see any more rust in the pores and recessed areas of the surface. Also, you can really see the etching lines left behind from the aggressive settings of the laser cleaner. These are going to be a great surface for the epoxy primer to bite to. But just to confirm there was no more rust hiding beneath the laser cleaned surface, I went over the surface once again with the 40 grit drum. And there was absolutely no more rust hiding beneath the clean surface that could scrape off with a sharp chisel. So now I just had to repeat that process over the entire frame. Notice I have the box fan beside me while I'm working. This does two things. It blows all the vaporized rust dust away from me so I'm not breathing it in. It also blows the dust away from the cleaning head, which helps extend the life of the protective lens. That looked pretty easy in time-lapse mode, but here's about how fast it is in real time. Next, it was time to go over the area I just laser cleaned with the 40 grit drum to knock off any loose material and expose any more rust where there was heavy scaling. Due to the shape of this tool and the sort of the way this drum is offset and just the area around the drum, I can't get into all the nooks and crannies like right in here, over in here, definitely not between here and down in here. So I'm gonna bust out the old wire wheel here to get into all those detailed areas. And then there's still some areas I can't get to with the wire wheel. So, doing this the old-fashioned way. And then I went back over the frame again with the laser cleaner to take off any newly exposed rust that I uncovered with the wire wheel and brush. Next, it was time to clean the inside edge of the driver's side frame rail. Notice the piece of sheet metal that I have propped up on the outside of the frame. This is absolutely essential to avoid damaging background objects with the laser if I go over the edge of the frame. If you're subscribed to the channel, you know I'm a huge fan of the laser cleaning machines. I sold my sandblaster because it was just collecting dust. However, after this experience, I do think there are still situations where sandblasting is the best solution. Even though it's messy, requires medium, and a large area, heavy scaling rust like you see on this frame would have been easier to sandblast in one step. Even if it required going very slow the entire time, it would have saved the multiple passes with a laser in between other abrasive power tools like the 40 grit drum and the wire wheel. With the laser cleaner, you're cleaning with light, so sometimes it can be tough to get into all the nooks and crannies. With a sandblaster, the blasting medium can bounce around and deflect in the hidden and hard to reach areas, helping to clean those as well. I don't know what it would cost to sandblast this frame, but if I could find someone to do it for 500 bucks, I would have gladly paid that. But I was already this far along doing it myself, so I kept powering through. I want to say I completed every step of this restoration myself right here in my residential garage because I enjoy a good challenge. This rear crossmember took 3 passes of the laser with the wire wheel in between those passes since the 40 grit drum was too big to use here. But here's how it looked when it was all done. That texture left on the clean surface is a combination of the heavy pitting plus the etching of the aggressive settings on the laser to create the perfect surface for direct-to-metal epoxy primer to bite to. Here's one of those areas where it was tough to get inside with the laser cleaner. Although the laser looks like one solid beam to our eyes, it's not. Here's a slow motion close-up of the laser where you can actually see the beam going back and forth on the surface, burning off the rust. New leaf springs were out of the budget, so I decided I'd clean up the old ones the best I could. All right, I'm about halfway through this frame. I've done the outside, I've done the top, and I've done the inside. And I also did all the leaf springs, and I want to do the axles out there as well. But the next step is going to be taking this frame and flipping it over so that I can clean the underside. And then it's in the 90s this week. My hope is later this Friday, I'll be able to paint it. Let's go to the other side of the garage. And over here, we have the paint and the primer that I'm going to use. This is a direct-to-metal epoxy primer and catalyst. And then we have a Hot Rod Satin Black 2K paint and a slow activator because it is going to be hot this week. And this will give the frame an OEM look compared to like a gloss black or a flat black. So as I was cleaning the frame, I noticed that it sort of seemed like it was losing power toward the end there. And I definitely noticed that it seemed down on power when I was cleaning the leaf springs. So I thought to look in here with the machine off, of course, and I noticed that the protective lens was completely covered over and filthy, and it actually had a chip in it. Now, this is only the second time I've had to replace this in about 6 months, so I'm not complaining at all, but now that I put the new lens in, this thing cooks. So now, with that fresh protective lens on here, I should get a lot more power to the frame and hopefully strip this a lot faster than I did for the top side. It was finally time to flip over the frame and clean the underside. Just like the top side, the bottom wasn't too rusty up front. Then some scaling around the middle, and all the heavy scaling at the rear, especially on the underside of the spare tire crossmember. Just like before, step 1 was the needle scaler. Then came the first pass with the laser cleaner on the most aggressive 30 Hz frequency setting. You've seen this all before when I clean the top side of the frame, so let's jump ahead 3.5 hours to the final step. I got the whole frame laser cleaned. Used a 40 grit drum on it. Used a wire wheel. Then I used this big wire brush. And now I'm down to the fine details that I couldn't reach with anything else with this little tiny wire brush. No rust left behind. I never thought I'd be cleaning a frame with a steel wire toothbrush, but this was the best I could do to make it as perfect as possible. And spoiler alert, it's all going to be worth it in the end. After the wire brushing, it was time for another round of laser cleaning. Well, I've got this frame flipped over upside down. It's a great time to show you guys a big flaw and the design of this frame, this and this, there's one there and one there. These are all the drain holes to allow things to drain out of the frame, like mud, debris, water, pebbles, whatever. And there's holes elsewhere in the frame that are much bigger than this. And that's part of the reason that these frames do get clogged up and start to rot from the inside out. So instead of this, quarter, 3/16 inch hole, I'm gonna take a 5/8 inch drill bit and enlarge all 4 of these drain holes to ensure that should the inside of this frame get debris or mud in the future, it does wash out a lot easier. Right about now, my garage was an absolute mess. I had one of my summer interns get to work on cleaning up the axle housings. And Mikey helped me set the frame up higher so it would be easier to paint. It has been so hot and humid in Ohio that the frame was already starting to flash rust, so I gave it another quick pass with the laser. Then I did some more cleaning in the hidden areas with a tiny wire brush, including all the areas in the frame where the leaf spring bushings were located, and followed up with a laser. Now it was time to paint. First, I wiped down everything that I was going to be painting with acetone to remove any remaining dust, dirt, or grease. For the primer, I'm using a direct-to-metal epoxy primer by Kirker. This is one of the cheapest gallon DTM epoxy primers I could find online, and I'm happy with how it turned out. I'll put a link in the description. It's a 1-to-1 mix ratio, so I'll have plenty left over when it comes time to spray the body. Raising up the frame was a good call, as I was easily able to spray the top, bottom, and all sides. I applied 2 coats of primer to the frame, axle housings, leaf springs, and cross member. Okay, primer is done. I've got my color set up here, ready to go. As soon as this dries a little bit more, I'm happy with how it turned out. I did get some runs, but you know what? It's a frame. No one's gonna be inspecting it up close. I did get some heavy areas. It's really hard to spray in all these tiny nooks and crannies. So here where the body mount bushings go, you can see it's pretty thick and still not too cured in there still. Same over, I think here I had a little bit of a heavy area, but I'm gonna let this sit for a little while longer and then I'll be on to my color. Again, a lot of little nooks and crannies. I've got some paint kind of settling down in that little recessed area right there. I went with the slower reducer for the color coat because I knew I'd be painting this a little bit later in the morning when the temperature's rising than when I did the primer. One really great thing about the laser cleaner is that you can change the settings to give you sort of an etched surface like this here, even on metal that was perfectly smooth because there was not really any heavy rust up front here, and it gives a great surface for new primer and paint to bite to. We'll do the color in real time. Here is my satin black. I gave it a good shake. Give it a quick stir just to make sure nothing's on the bottom. And this is a 3-to-1 mix ratio. And again, I'm using the slow speed because it's about 87 degrees right now. So for a 3-to-1 mix ratio, I'm gonna mix 1, 2, 3 parts of color and then 1 part of the activator. 1, 2, 3. One. Nice and mixed here. All right, pop a filter on here, pour it in, nice and slow. Pull the filter off, set it back on the measuring cup to keep dirt and stuff from getting in there. and we're ready to paint. Again, I purchased the cheapest satin black paint that I could find online, which was this Hot Rod Black by Kirker. And I highly recommend it. Link is in the description. It was easy to mix, easy to apply, and covered really well. I'm just doing this in my garage, doors wide open, without any sort of air filtration because it's just a frame. When it comes time for the body, I might try one of those inflatable spray booths. Painting when the temperature is almost 90 isn't ideal, but the slow activator fixed that. I needed a refill after the first coat was on the frame. And then I applied the first color coat to the axles, cross member, and leaf springs. Because it takes a while to cover all the surfaces of the frame, it had been about 30 minutes since I started painting the first coat of satin black, so it was time for the second coat to go on the frame. The axles and the leaf springs took a lot less time. All right, just got the guns cleaned out. It's so hot out. I am just drenched in sweat, but let's check it out. It's still wet right now. The second coat was a heavy coat, so it's gonna be glossy like this until it dries. And I got everything done. A nice first coat, a good wet second coat. So I'm gonna leave all this hanging out here overnight, and we will check back in the morning. The next day, I cleaned up all the overspray. So here's how it looks about 24 hours later. A little bit glossier than I would have expected. I did put that last coat on a little heavy, so I guess that could have something to do with it, but it is supposed to be a Hot Rod satin black, which I figured would look more of like a matte finish, but I don't mind. I'm just really happy that it's protected, it's rust-free, and it's gonna look great when it's under the restored body, whenever that gets around to happening. Next time, my new summer intern and I are gonna reassemble all this back into a rolling chassis. Thanks for watching.